I'm Rachel Torres. I'm 31 years old. I graduated top of my class at Johns Hopkins Medical School, completed a neurosurgery residency at Mayo Clinic, and at 29, I became the youngest chief of neurosurgery at Boston General Hospital. I've held a human brain in my hands. I've cut into spinal cords thinner than a pencil while a patient's family prayed in the waiting room. I make life and death decisions before most people finish their morning coffee. But when I walked through my mother's front door in Savannah, Georgia, on the Friday before Thanksgiving, none of that mattered. Because the man sitting in my father's old armchair didn't see a surgeon. He saw a girl in a hoodie carrying a duffel bag. And he decided, right then and there, that I was nobody. He had no idea that inside my bag was a hospital ID badge, a framed certificate, and a stack of credentials that would make his little charade collapse like a house of cards. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And hit that subscribe button if you believe in one simple truth. Never judge a woman by her silence. The drive from Boston to Savannah is 15 hours if you don't stop. I stopped twice. Once for gas in Maryland and once for a terrible cup of coffee somewhere in North Carolina. My hands were still shaking from the week I'd had. 36 hours on call. A 9-hour surgery on a 17-year-old with a brain tumor the size of a golf ball. She made it. She was going to walk again. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the inside of her skull, the delicate pink tissue, the monitors beeping. I needed my mom. I needed her creaky porch swing and her sweet tea and the sound of the Savannah River at dusk. I needed to sit in the kitchen while she made her cornbread stuffing for Thanksgiving and talked about her garden club drama. I needed to be someone's daughter instead of someone's doctor. I turned onto Abercorn Street, the old live oaks draped in Spanish moss making a tunnel of green and gray. Everything about this neighborhood was familiar. The cracked sidewalk where I learned to ride a bike, the fire hydrant our dog Biscuit used to bark at, the mailbox my dad repainted every spring, always the same shade of navy blue. But when I pulled up to the house, something was wrong. There was a car in the driveway. Not my mother's sensible Camry. A white BMW X5, brand new, gleaming under the porch light like a trophy. It had a vanity plate that read Dirk. It was parked dead center in the driveway, taking up both spots, forcing me to park on the street in front of the neighbor's house. My dad never would have parked like that. He always pulled to the left, leaving room. It was a small thing, but small things tell you everything about a person. I grabbed my duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked up the porch steps. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and immediately something felt wrong. The house didn't smell right. My mother's house always smelled like lemon furniture polish and whatever she was baking. Pecan pie this time of year. Instead, I was hit by the sharp chemical scent of some expensive cologne. It was overpowering. The kind of fragrance that announces a man's insecurity before he enters the room. And underneath the cologne, something else. Medical. Antiseptic. Like someone had been playing doctor. Linda, that you? Grab me a sparkling water from the fridge. The Pellegrino. Not the store brand. The voice came from the living room. It was deep, practiced. The kind of voice that had been trained to sound authoritative. I walked toward it. He was sitting in my father's recliner, the brown leather lazy boy that still had a faded ring on the armrest where my dad used to set his coffee mug every morning for 23 years. My dad died in that chair, peacefully, watching the Braves play 3 years ago. My mother had kept it exactly as it was, a memorial. Now there was a stranger in it. He was maybe 55. With a full head of silver hair that was a little too perfect, a deep tan that came from a booth, not the sun, and a polo shirt with some golf club logo embroidered on the chest. He was wearing reading glasses and scrolling through his phone, his Italian loafers propped up on my mother's coffee table. The antique coffee table that had been my grandmother's. He looked up. He gave me a slow, appraising look. The kind that starts at your shoes and works its way up. I was wearing running shoes, leggings, and a Boston General hoodie, with a coffee stain on the sleeve. I looked like a grad student, not a department chief. I could see the exact moment he categorized me and dismissed me. You must be the daughter. He didn't stand up. He extended his hand in a lazy half wave, not even reaching forward. Rick Holloway. Dr. Rick Holloway. He said doctor the way a child says their full name when they're trying to impress. He waited for me to react. Rachel Torres, I said. I walked over and shook his hand. His grip was soft and overly moisturized. He squeezed too hard in that way men do when they're performing strength. I gave him a brief, firm shake and let go. Your mom told me you were coming down. She said you work in medicine? He tilted his head, a condescending smirk forming. Let me guess. Nursing? Physician's assistant? Don't be embarrassed. The medical field needs worker bees just as much as it needs surgeons. He chuckled at his own analogy. Something like that, I said. Well, good for you, sweetheart. Healthcare is a noble profession for a young woman. Gives you a steady paycheck until you settle down. He winked. He actually winked at me. I'm a physician myself. Private practice. Aesthetic medicine. You know, Botox, fillers, skin rejuvenation. I've built a little empire down here in Savannah. 15 years. He was watching my face for admiration. When he didn't find it, his eyes narrowed slightly. Rachel! Oh my God, honey, you're here. My mother came rushing out of the kitchen. She was wearing an apron, her hands dusted with flour. But she looked different. Thinner. 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 Thin. 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 There were lines around her mouth that I didn't remember, the kind that come from pressing your lips together too often. Her hair, which she used to keep in a neat silver bob, was longer now, less maintained. But the biggest change was in her eyes. They were darting. She looked at me, then at Rick, then back at me, checking, calculating. She was reading the room before she allowed herself to feel joy at seeing her own daughter. That micro-hesitation made my chest ache more than 36 hours of surgery ever could. Hi, Mom. I pulled her into a hug. She felt fragile. She used to squeeze me until I couldn't breathe. Now she held me loosely, carefully, like she was afraid of taking up too much space. You look tired, baby. Was the drive okay? She looks more than tired, Rick said from the recliner, not looking up from his phone. She looks like she hasn't seen a dermatologist in years. I can see those dark circles from here. I could fix that, you know. A little filler under the eyes. On the house. Consider it a family discount. He laughed. My mother forced a smile. Rick is so generous, Mom said quickly, her voice pitched a little too high. He treats all his clients like royalty. He has the most amazing practice. It's a gift, Rick agreed, standing up now, stretching, claiming the room. I've got a waiting list 8 months long. People fly in from Atlanta, Charlotte, even Miami for these hands. He held up his palms and wiggled his fingers. I looked at his hands. They were soft and unmarked. No calluses from surgery, no tiny scars from years of suturing. They were the hands of a man who injected Botox with a pre-filled syringe. My hands, by contrast, were dry and cracked from surgical scrubs. I had a small scar on my left index finger from a scalpel slip during my 2nd year of residency. My hands had been inside a living human body over 400 times. Dinner's almost ready, Mom said, pulling me toward the kitchen. I made your favorite. Shrimp and grits. Actually, Linda, Rick called out, I told you I wanted the sea base tonight. The shrimp and grits is too heavy. We talked about this. My nutritionist says shellfish twice in 1 week throws off my macros. Mom froze. Her face fell. I can make both, she stammered. Don't bother. Just make the grits as a side and I'll pick around the shrimp. But honestly, Linda, you need to start writing these things down. I watched my mother shrink 2 inches. The shrimp and grits sounds incredible, Mom, I said. Loud enough for Rick to hear. It's a 15-hour drive. I've been dreaming about it since Virginia. She gave me a grateful look, but she still made the sea base. Dinner was a performance. Rick sat at the head of the table. The head. The spot where my father sat every night for 23 years. Where he carved the Thanksgiving turkey. Where he said grace. My mother had kept a small framed photo of my dad on the sideboard next to that chair. It was gone. Moved to the hallway, I noticed later, turned face down. Rick served himself first. He didn't wait for my mother. He didn't offer me anything. He loaded his plate, then immediately reached for the salt, shaking it over the food before tasting it. Linda, he said, chewing with his mouth slightly open, the sea bass needed more lemon. I told you, a squeeze of fresh lemon, not bottled. You can taste the preservatives. I used fresh, Rick. I squeezed it myself. Well, it doesn't taste fresh. He pushed the fish to the side of his plate. Anyway, Rachel, let me give you some career advice since your mother says you're interested in medicine. I hadn't asked for advice. He hadn't asked what I did. The key to success in medicine, Rick announced, picking up his wine glass, a glass of my mother's good Pinot Noir, is patient relations. You have to make people feel special. That's what separates a real doctor from a technician. Anyone can learn to stab a needle into someone. But the art of medicine, that's about presence, confidence, salesmanship. He tapped the side of his nose. I grossed 1.2 million last year. After overhead, I took home about 400,000. Not bad for a guy from Macon. And that's because I don't just treat patients. I create experiences. I sell transformations. He looked at me like he expected a standing ovation. That's impressive, I said evenly. What medical school did you attend? Emory, he said without hesitation. Class of 95. Best 4 years of my life. Well, the best 4 years before I met your mother. He reached across and patted my mother's hand. She smiled, but it was the smile of a woman performing happiness. And your residency? I asked. Dermatology. University of Miami. Brutal program. You wouldn't believe the hours. I can imagine, I said. He couldn't tell I was cataloging every word. Something was off. His stories didn't add up. He talked about medicine the way someone who had watched a lot of Grey's Anatomy talked about medicine. Broad strokes, impressive-sounding terms, no real depth. I'd spent over a decade surrounded by physicians. I could spot a fake stethoscope from across the room, but I didn't say anything yet. I needed more. So, Rachel, Rick said, leaning back, patting his stomach. 31 and still single? Your mother worries about you, you know. I've been focused on my career. See, that's the problem with your generation. He pointed his fork at me. You women chase careers like they're going to keep you warm at night. You know what I tell my female patients? You can get Botox at 50, but you can't get your eggs back. Biology doesn't care about your ambition. I felt the heat climb up my neck. I looked at my mom. She was staring at her plate, pushing a shrimp around with her fork. He just wants you to be happy, Mom whispered. He has a lot of experience with women. I do, Rick confirmed. I see women every day who put career first and regret it. They come to me because they're trying to turn back the clock. But I tell them, the face is just the surface. The real aging happens when you're alone. I set my fork down very carefully. I appreciate the concern, Rick, I said, my voice neutral, controlled. The same voice I use when I'm telling a family their loved one has a 5% chance of surviving surgery. I'll keep that in mind. I excused myself early. I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, breathing slowly. Inside my duffel bag was my hospital badge, Chief of Neurosurgery, Boston General Hospital. There was also a framed certificate, the Morrow Award for Surgical Excellence. It's given once a year. I was the youngest recipient in the award's history and the first woman. I could have pulled it out at dinner. I could have watched his face collapse. But the timing wasn't right. I needed to find out the truth about Dr. Rick Holloway first. I set my alarm for 5 in the morning. The house was dark at 0500. I crept downstairs in socks, avoiding the squeaky third step from the bottom, a trick I'd learned sneaking out in high school. I expected silence. Instead, I saw a light in the kitchen. Rick was at the kitchen table, his reading glasses on, hunched over a laptop. He was so focused he didn't hear me approach. I stood in the shadow of the hallway and watched. On the screen, I could see what looked like a bank dashboard. He was transferring money between accounts. I couldn't see the amounts, but I could see the account name at the top of the page. Linda Torres, my mother's bank account. I stepped into the light. Early morning banking, Rick? He slammed the laptop shut so fast he nearly cracked the screen. He spun around, his face white. Jesus. Rachel? You scared me. He pulled off his glasses, forcing a laugh. I was just checking the weather. You know, for Thanksgiving. Want to make sure we can eat on the patio. The weather app doesn't usually require my mother's bank login. His face twitched. Just for a second. Then the mask came back, smooth and polished. Your mother asked me to help manage her finances. She's not great with numbers. The property taxes are coming up and I'm making sure she's not getting overcharged. That's what partners do, Rachel. They help. He stood up, tucking the laptop under his arm. I'm going to check on something outside. He brushed past me, smelling of sleep and that overpowering cologne. I waited until I heard the front door close. Then I moved. I didn't go to the laptop. He'd taken it with him. I went to the recycling bin. Arrogant people are always sloppy. Under a layer of wine bottles and a Whole Foods bag, I found what I was looking for. A credit card statement. Rick's name, my mother's address. A Visa Platinum. I scanned the charges. A $3,200 charge at a BMW dealership. The monthly lease payment for the X5 in the driveway. A $1,800 charge at a men's clothing store in downtown Savannah. A $475 charge at a golf resort. A $220 charge at a restaurant I recognized. A place where the cheapest entree was $60. Every single charge was on a card linked to my mother's bank account. I folded the statement, put it in my pocket, and went to make coffee. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady. Surgeon's hands, diagnostic hands. I found my mother in the garden after breakfast. Rick had gone to the club, whatever that meant. She was kneeling by her rose bushes, pruning with small, careful snips. "Mom, we need to talk." I showed her the credit card statement. I watched her face move through the stages. Confusion, recognition, shame. "It's complicated," she started. "It's not complicated. He's spending your money. Dad's life insurance, your retirement savings, on a BMW, on golf, on clothes. He's going through a rough patch," she said, her voice thin. "His practice had some issues. A lawsuit. His accounts got frozen. It's temporary. He's paying me back." "What kind of lawsuit?" "I don't know the details. He doesn't like to talk about it. He says it's a disgruntled patient. You know how litigious people are these days. Mom, a successful dermatologist grossing $1.2 million doesn't need his girlfriend to pay his car lease. He's not just my boyfriend," she snapped. Tears were forming. "He loves me, Rachel. After your father died, I was alone for 2 years. 2 years of eating dinner by myself. 2 years of silence. Rick makes me feel seen. He makes you feel needed," I corrected. "There's a difference." She turned away from me, her shoulders were shaking. I dropped it, for now. But that night, in my room, I opened my laptop and started digging. It took me 40 minutes. The internet is a surgeon's second scalpel. There was no Dr. Richard Holloway listed in the Georgia Medical Board's physician registry. I checked Florida. Nothing. I checked every state. Nothing. I searched the Emory School of Medicine alumni database. No Richard Holloway graduated in 1995, or 1994, or any year. I found him on a different kind of database. The Georgia Secretary of State Business Filings. Rick Holloway had registered an LLC called Holloway Aesthetics 4 years ago, but the business classification wasn't medical. It was listed under personal care services, the same category as nail salons and massage parlors. He wasn't a doctor. He had never been a doctor. He was running a med spa, probably with someone else's medical license as a cover, injecting fillers and Botox under supervision at best, illegally at worst. His entire identity was a fabrication. The Emory degree, the residency, the empire, all of it, a costume. And he had targeted my mother, a grieving widow with a paid-off house and a healthy savings account, and was methodically draining her finances while she clipped coupons for groceries and apologized for using bottled lemon juice. I closed my laptop. My heart was pounding, but my mind was crystal clear. The same clarity I felt before I made the first incision. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I knew exactly when I was going to do it. Thanksgiving dinner. Thanksgiving morning. The kitchen smelled like heaven. Turkey in the oven, sweet potatoes with marshmallow topping, my mother's famous cornbread stuffing. She'd been up since 6, moving through the kitchen with the efficient grace of a woman who had been cooking Thanksgiving dinner for 30 years. Rick wandered in around 10, wearing a cashmere sweater and slacks, looking like he was posing for a catalog. He picked at the cranberry sauce with his finger, tasted it, and made a face. "Too tart. You need more sugar, Linda." I used my mother's recipe, Rick. "Your mother wasn't a nutritionist." He opened the fridge and grabbed a sparkling water. "I've been thinking. After dinner, I want to talk to you about that renovation idea. The kitchen is outdated. We could open it up, put in an island, quartz countertops. I got a quote from a contractor. 60,000. 60,000? Mom's voice cracked. "It's an investment, babe. Property values in this neighborhood are climbing. We'd make it back when we sell." "Sell?" The color drained from my mother's face. "Rick, I'm not selling this house. Your father built this deck. Rachel took her first steps in this hallway. Linda. Rick's voice dropped. It was the voice. The one that sounded reasonable but carried a threat underneath. We've talked about this. Sentimentality is the enemy of smart financial planning. I'm a doctor. I understand return on investment. Trust me. I was standing in the doorway, holding a dish towel. I watched my mother's spine curve inward, her shoulders dropping, her eyes going to the floor. We'll talk about it later, she whispered. We'll talk about it today, he said. Not a suggestion. A command. He walked out, sparkling water in hand, whistling. I crossed the kitchen and stood next to my mother. She was gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. He just has strong opinions, she said before I could speak. Mom, look at me. She looked up. Her eyes were wet. Do you trust me? I asked. She nodded. Then, trust me tonight. No matter what happens. No matter what you hear. Trust that I'm doing it because I love you. Rachel, what are you going to? Trust me, Mom. She searched my face. Whatever she found there, it was enough. She nodded again. Thanksgiving dinner. 4 o'clock. The table was set with my mother's good china, the set with the tiny blue flowers that came out once a year. Candles. Cloth napkins. The turkey was golden and perfect, the stuffing fragrant, the sweet potatoes caramelized to a deep amber. Rick sat at the head of the table. He carved the turkey himself, without being asked. Another small act of dominance. He served himself first, then gestured for us to serve ourselves. As if it were his table, his food, his home. He was 2 glasses of wine in and warming up for his performance. He launched into a story about a celebrity client, name-dropped a local news anchor, and described a procedure he'd performed that he called revolutionary. The thing about aesthetic medicine, Rick lectured, pointing his knife at me, is that it requires a real artist's eye. Not everyone can do what I do. Any butcher can cut someone open, but to sculpt, to reshape, to make someone beautiful, that takes God-given talent. Any butcher, I repeated softly. My mother glanced at me. No offense to your line of work, Rick added, waving his hand. Nursing is important. Someone has to take vitals and change bedpans. The medical system would collapse without you girls. Rick, my mother said quietly, Rachel isn't a nurse. PA? Technician? Whatever. The point is, you're still young. You could go back to school. I could even mentor you. I've trained dozens of aestheticians. I set my wine glass down. I folded my napkin. I looked at Rick Holloway, this man who had spent 3 days telling me who I was. This man who called surgery butchery. This man who was eating a Thanksgiving meal paid for with my mother's savings. This man who was sitting in my father's chair. Rick, I said, what's the standard protocol for a suboccipital craniotomy? The silence was immediate. Rick's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. What? Suboccipital craniotomy. The posterior fossa approach. It's a basic neurosurgical procedure. If you went to Emory and completed a medical residency, you'd know it. Walk me through the patient positioning. Rick's face went through 3 colors in 2 seconds. Pink, white, gray. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Oh, that's not my field, he stammered. I'm in aesthetics. I don't deal with that kind of… Fine. Something simpler. What's the mechanism of action of botulinum toxin type A? You inject it every day. You should be able to explain it at a molecular level. It paralyzes the muscles, he said, his voice shrinking. Everyone knows that. How? Which neurotransmitter does it block? What's the synaptic mechanism? Nothing. His mouth was a thin, tight line. It blocks acetylcholine release at the neuromuscular junction by cleaving snare proteins, I said. Specifically, it targets SNAP, 2-5. Every first-year medical student knows this. Every real doctor knows this. I reached under my chair where I'd placed my bag before dinner. I pulled out my hospital badge and set it on the table. The photo. The name. The title. Chief of Neurosurgery. Boston General Hospital. Then I placed the framed Morrow Award certificate next to it. Then I placed a printout from the Georgia Medical Board. No physician named Richard Holloway licensed in the state of Georgia. The 3 items sat on the white tablecloth between the cranberry sauce and the turkey, gleaming under the candlelight. Rick stared at them. He stared the way patients stare at an MRI showing a mass they weren't expecting. Total cognitive shutdown. The arrogant architecture of his personality, the posture, the booming voice, the practiced smirk, all of it crumbled. He looked at the badge. He looked at me. I'm the chief of neurosurgery at one of the top 5 hospitals in the country, I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used in the operating room. Calm, precise, absolute. I perform surgeries that last 12 hours. I hold people's brains in my hands, Rick. I have saved more lives this year alone than you will touch in your entire career, if you can even call it that. I tapped the Georgia Medical Board printout. Because according to the state of Georgia, you are not a doctor. You have never been a doctor. There is no record of a Richard Holloway graduating from Emory's medical school. There is no dermatology residency. There is no medical license. You operate an LLC classified as a personal care service. You are, at best, an unlicensed esthetician. At worst, you are committing medical fraud. Rick's face was ashen. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple and dropped onto his cashmere sweater. Now, that's not he started. I'm not finished. My voice dropped half an octave. He flinched. You moved into my mother's home. You sat in my father's chair. You ate her food, drank her wine, and drove a car paid for with her savings. You have spent the last 5 months telling her that she's lucky to have you, that she can't manage her own finances, that she needs a man to function. You have systematically dismantled a strong, independent woman and turned her into someone who apologizes for using bottled lemon juice in her own kitchen. I stood up. Rick, you're not a doctor. You're not a colonel. You're not an alpha. You are a con artist who preys on lonely women, and your con is over. The silence in the dining room was thick enough to cut with a surgical blade. Rick's eyes darted to my mother. His last play. The ace he always kept up his sleeve. Linda, baby. She's twisting everything. She's jealous. She's trying to break us up because she can't stand to see you happy. Stop. My mother's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a scalpel through tissue. She had been sitting perfectly still throughout my entire speech, her hands flat on the table, her eyes moving between the evidence and Rick's face. She stood up, slowly. She smoothed her apron. And then she looked at Rick with an expression I hadn't seen since I was 12 years old and a boy at school had called me a name. It was the look of a mother who had found her fire. I called Emory this morning, she said. Rick's jaw dropped. So did mine. Rachel told me to trust her. But I needed to see for myself. So this morning, while you were at the club, I called the alumni office at Emory Medical School. I gave them your name. I gave them your graduation year. She paused. There's no Richard Holloway. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through it. And then I called the Georgia Medical Board. I didn't even know you could do that. But Rachel taught me. I typed your name into their website and there was nothing. Nothing, Rick. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was not breaking. She was breaking through. You told me your accounts were frozen. You told me DFOS had a glitch. You told me you'd pay me back. I believed you because I wanted to believe that someone chose me. That after 3 years of eating dinner alone, someone saw me. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her apron pocket. The credit card statement. $47,000, Rick. That's what you've taken from me in 5 months. My husband worked 40 years for that money. He never missed a day. He never complained. And you spent it on a car, on clothes, on golf? She set the statement on the table next to my badge. Get out of my house. Rick's face contorted. The mask was fully gone now. What was underneath was ugly, small and mean and desperate. You can't do this, he hissed. I have rights. I've been living here for... You have no lease, I said, stepping forward. No legal tenancy agreement. In the state of Georgia, you are a guest. And your invitation has just been revoked. You can leave on your own, or I can call my colleague at Savannah PD, a detective I operated on last year who happens to be very interested in medical fraud cases. Your choice. He looked at me. He looked at my mother. He looked at the evidence on the table. He saw the wall. Fine. He threw his napkin on the plate, knocking over his wine glass. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like a wound. Fine. You want to rot in this old house with your medals and your loneliness? Be my guest. Both of you. He stormed out of the dining room. We heard him stomping upstairs, heard drawers being yanked open, heard things being thrown into a suitcase. The performance of a man who wanted the last word, even as the curtain was closing. 7 minutes later, he came down, dragging a rolling suitcase that probably cost more than my mother's monthly grocery budget. He stopped at the front door. He turned and pointed at me. "You think you're so smart. You think your little degree makes you special. But you'll end up alone. Both of you. Alone and pathetic." "We'll manage," my mother said from behind me. "Now give me the house key." He fumbled with his keychain, ripped the key off with shaking hands, and threw it on the floor. Then he walked out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. The BMW started, the engine revved, tires squealed, and then silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of the last 3 days. A clean silence. An empty room after the patient has been wheeled out of the OR and you know in your bones that they're going to be okay. My mother stood in the foyer, trembling. Then the dam broke. A sob ripped out of her chest, and she covered her face with her flour-dusted hands. "I was so stupid, Rachel. How could I be so stupid?" "You weren't stupid," I said, wrapping my arms around her. "You were lonely." And he weaponized that. "That's not your fault. That's his crime." She cried into my shoulder for a long time. I held her the way she used to hold me when I had nightmares as a kid. Tight and steady and unwavering. "I want to change the locks," she said when she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with her apron. "First thing tomorrow. And I want to repaint the hallway." He made me paint it gray. He called it executive slate. I hate it. I want yellow. Like it used to be. "Then we're going to Home Depot in the morning." She let out a shaky laugh. "On Black Friday?" "Mom, I've done 9-hour brain surgeries. I can handle a Home Depot on Black Friday." She laughed again, and this time, it was real. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere that Rick hadn't been able to reach. We locked the door, we checked the windows. Then we went back to the dining room and sat down at the Thanksgiving table. The turkey was cold. The wine stain was still spreading across the tablecloth. His chair was empty. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm thankful," she said, "that you came home." "I'm thankful," I said, "that you still make the best stuffing in Georgia." We ate cold turkey and warm stuffing and finished the bottle of wine. We didn't talk about Rick. We talked about the garden club, about my surgeries, about whether Biscuit the dog would have liked the sweet potatoes. We talked the way we used to talk, before grief made my mother vulnerable and a predator walked through the door. The next morning we changed the locks. A locksmith named Earl with a Semper Fi tattoo on his forearm installed a grade 1 deadbolt and tested it 3 times. Then we drove to Home Depot. Mom picked a color called Sunbeam Morning. It was the brightest, most aggressive yellow I had ever seen. It was perfect. We painted all afternoon. Motown on the speakers. Mom sang along to Aretha Franklin, Respect, hitting every beat with her paint roller. We got yellow paint on the floor, on the ceiling, on each other. We didn't care. By evening, the hallway glowed. "It looks like the house is smiling," Mom said. She was right. It did. Before I left on Sunday, I sat with my mother and we went through everything. We froze her credit with all 3 bureaus. We closed the joint checking account Rick had pressured her into opening. We filed a report with the Savannah PD. The detective, the one I'd operated on, took the case personally. It turned out Rick Holloway had a trail. 3 other women in 2 states. Same pattern, lonely widow, fake credentials, slow financial drain. 2 months later, I was back in Boston, elbow deep in a 12-hour surgery, when my phone buzzed during a break. A text from Mom. Guess what? I joined a book club. We're reading Educated by Tara Westover. I'm the oldest one there and I love it. Also, Detective Morrison called. Rick got arrested in Tallahassee. Same scheme. Different widow. She caught him faster than I did because I told her my story. Your mother is now a professional con artist catcher. Love you, Dr. Torres. I laughed so hard the scrub nurse gave me a look. 3 months after that, Mom sent me a photo. She was standing in front of a community college, holding a registration form. She had enrolled in an art history class. At 67 years old, "Your father always said I should go back to school," she texted. Rick said it was a waste of time. Turns out your father was right about everything. The next Thanksgiving, I drove down to Savannah again. 15 hours, 2 stops, One terrible cup of coffee in North Carolina. When I pulled up to the house, the driveway was empty. Just Mom's Camry, parked to the left, leaving room. The front door smelled like pecan pie. The hallway was sunbeam morning yellow. The recliner had been reupholstered in a deep navy blue, and on the armrest sat a fresh coffee mug ring, right on top of the old one. Mom's ring now. On the sideboard next to Dad's chair, his framed photo was back. And next to it, a new frame. My Morrow Award certificate. I put it up last month, Mom said, catching me staring. Everyone who comes into this house should know what my daughter does. Mom, that's embarrassing. It's the truth. And the truth, she said, handing me a glass of sweet tea, is the best decoration I own. We sat on the porch swing as the sun set over Savannah. The Spanish moss swayed in the warm breeze. The river was a gold ribbon in the distance. Rachel? Yeah, Mom? Thank you for not letting me disappear. I leaned my head on her shoulder. You were never going to disappear, Mom. You just needed someone to remind you that you're the one who holds the scalpel. She laughed. That's a weird metaphor. I'm a surgeon. All my metaphors are weird. We sat there as the sky turned purple, drinking sweet tea, listening to the crickets. Two women in a yellow house, finally at peace. Not because the bad man was gone, but because the woman he tried to erase had remembered who she was. If you're listening to this and you know someone like Rick, someone who makes the people you love feel small, I want you to remember one thing. Predators don't announce themselves. They come with compliments, charm, and Pellegrino water. They make themselves necessary. And by the time you realize what's happening, they've already rewritten the story with themselves as the hero. But here's the truth. No one can erase you without your permission. And it is never, ever too late to take the pen back. If this story hit home, hit that like button and subscribe to Picked Revenge. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to unmask someone who wasn't who they claimed to be? I want to hear your story. Until next time, stand tall, trust your instincts, and never apologize for being the smartest person in the room.